Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and a blessing to be with you throughout these last few days, and especially this morning to pray with you and to celebrate the Divine Liturgy together. My name is Father Maximus from Boston, Massachusetts, and I've been invited here these days to speak to the local clergy. And on Saturday, as many of you know, we had a one-day retreat program here at the parish, and I was again the main speaker. And today, His Eminence, Metropolitan Gerasimos, has invited me to offer a few words to you this morning by way of a homily. The theme of my sermon this morning is trials and tribulations. Trials and tribulations, something that everyone, I think, past a certain age, knows all about. We know that whoever is called by Christ is called to follow the way of Christ. That's what it means to be Christ's disciple, to follow the narrow and the difficult path. Why? Because this is the very path that Christ himself walked on. If the signs of this path, if the signs of this difficult and narrow way are not present in our lives, then we should be worried, because that means something is not right. In the words of St. Paul, all who wish to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted. Πάντες δε οι θέλοντες ζήν ευσεβώς εν Χριστώ Ιησού διωκθήσονται. And again in the Old Testament we hear these words, "My child, if you wish to serve the Lord, prepare yourself for trials. Τέκνον, η προσέρχη δουλεύειν Κυρίω Θεό, ετοίμασον την ψυχήν σου εις πειρασμόν." So we shouldn't think that simply because we believe in God, or that we come to church on Sundays, or that we make donations to the church, or anything like that, that our life will be easy, and that everything we do will prosper, and that everyone will love us and support us. Why? Because something like this is foreign to the experience of the saints, just as it was foreign to the experience of Christ himself. Christ came to his own, and his own knew him not. He was abandoned by his friends. He was betrayed by his closest followers. And this is why the robe of the church is dyed with the blood and the sweat and the tears of all the saints. And these are the marks, these are the signs, not simply of the authenticity of the saints, but of the church's authenticity itself. Just before his passion, Christ said to Peter, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. Simon, Simon, idou ο Σατανάς εξητήσατο ημάς του συνιάσε ως τον σύτων, εγώ δε εδεήθην περί σου ή να μη εκλείπει η πίστη σου." What a thing to have Jesus praying for you, so that the devil will not overcome you, and so that your faith will remain strong. So what then is a trial, a pειρασμός? What is a trial or a tribulation? It is anything that leads us to a difficult place. It is anything that leads us to a crisis in our lives. It is something that places pressure on us, something that places stress on us. It's something that brings us to a dead end, or at least what feels like a dead end, to a place in which we seem to have only bad choices in front of us, or perhaps no choices at all. It could be an illness. It could be the loss of a job. It could be a personal failure. It could be a hurtful remark that somebody made to you. Anything that strikes at the soul, anything that injures the soul, which bruises the heart and crushes the spirit. That's a trial. That's a temptation. That's a πειρασμός. There comes a time sometimes when we just can't take it anymore. when we reach our limit, when, like the psalmist, we feel like we have arrived at the gates of death. And like the psalmist says, I have become like one among the dead. And when we reach that place in our life, when we enter into that moment of crisis, when the difficulties surround us, we need to remember the words of the Lord to Saint Silouan of Mount Athos. Keep your mind in hell, but despair not. Κράτε το νουν σου στον Άδη και μη απελπίζεσαι. Keep your mind in hell, but despair not. It's not exactly immediately clear what that might mean, but I think as far as keeping your mind in hell, given what's going on in the world today, the brutality, the violence, the corruption, I mean, our world is descending into hell, so that part of the teaching is not difficult. Keep your mind in hell. It's all around us. It's all around us. Right? The important part is not to despair, not to despair, to stay in that place, to hold your ground, to stand up for what you believe in, and to not lose hope. So that in that place of darkness and in that place of defeat, only one thing remains for you, and that is faith in God. Faith in that whatever happens, no matter what happens, God has the last word in my life, not other people. And when we have this mind within us, God gives us even greater faith. Not the first faith that the saints of the church talk about, but the second faith. The first faith is the kind of simple belief, well, I suppose I believe in one God who created heaven and earth, and we repeat these formulas that we were taught, and we grant some sort of intellectual assent. I mean, we agree that they might be true. We have faith that they might be true. That's what the church fathers call first faith, proti pistis. Second faith, however, is something deeper. It's something more than a concept. It's something more than an idea. It's actually a living relationship of trust with God. It's a living experience of God and an existential fact of one's life. Indeed, it is the very entry of God into our consciousness in a very real and a very concrete way. Not just an idea, but a reality. Not just a thought or a concept, but a living relationship with God. That's what faith is. That's what the deeper faith is. Elder Paisius used to say that for all the difficulties that we have faced in our life, one day we will thank God for all of them. Because in reality, all of those difficulties were blessings because they brought us closer to God. And he says if we could see them with spiritual eyes, if we had spiritual eyes, he says we would ask God that our whole life could be a trial because of all of the benefits, because all of the grace that comes to us when we respond to the trial with faith and in faith. He said much more, he says, than the prayers of the church, or no matter how many prayers we say, no matter how many services of the church we attend to, no matter how many good deeds we do. Elder Paisius said that a few years of cancer, because he died of cancer, he said a few years of cancer were worth more to him than a lifetime of asceticism. Right? 20, 30, 40, 50 years on Mount Athos couldn't add up to 1 or 2 years of struggling with cancer and not losing one's faith. This week we celebrate Saint Nectarios. He's one of the great modern saints of the Orthodox Church. He died in about 1920, I think. And you know, there are thousands and thousands of miracles and cures that have been documented at the convent in Egina, where he spent the latter years of his life. And if you go to the convent, it's on an island not far from Athens, they have a room there, and the room contains dozens and dozens of volumes, books, containing letters and testimonies documenting all of Saint Nectarios' miracles. The last time that I heard the figure, it was more than 20,000. and that was some years ago. 20,000 miracles, 20,000 cures. And these are only the ones that have been documented. We can imagine that there are many more that don't have documentation or letters. And St. Nectarios was someone who was known to our grandparents. He was from the era of our grandparents. And there was a nun at the convent where St. Nectarios was living, and she began to have doubts about the saint. Logismi, as we say. She started to have negative thoughts about St. Nectarios. And she said to herself, well, why is he such a great saint anyway? Right? Why does he get to do all of these miracles? I mean, what did he do in his lifetime? He wasn't a great ascetic like the saints of old. He was just a regular person. He was just a regular bishop. What did he ever do? He lived like we did. He ate what we ate. He didn't do anything special. These were the thoughts that went through her mind. After a few days, she went to sleep, and she had a dream, and the Saint Nectarios appeared to her in a dream, and he said, you know something? You're right. I didn't do great ascetical feats like the ancient saints or the other things that the famous saints did. But I'll tell you something. God gave me this grace because I suffered terrible trials in my life, and I never complained, not even once. And we know what they did to St. Nectarios in his lifetime. And when I say they, I mean the members of his own church, priests, bishops, the members of his own household, just like Jesus Christ. They maligned St. Nectarios. They slandered St. Nectarios. The bishops in Egypt threw him out. He was a bishop in Cairo. They threw him out. Why? Because they were jealous of him. They resented his popularity. They resented the fact that the people loved him. So they threw him out. They expelled him from the church in Egypt, and he ended up in Athens without a penny, without money, even to pay rent or to buy food for himself. And he used to make a few dollars by giving sermons in the local churches. And one day when he came out to preach the sermon, the people began to shout him down from the pulpit. Why? Because they had heard all kinds of rumors and all kinds of gossip that St. Nectarios, his enemies, had put into circulation. And the saint had been falsely accused of being an immoral man and a corrupt individual. So when he came out to give the sermon, the crowd responded. They said, well, look who it is. They said, here's that corrupt bishop, that immoral bishop who they threw out of the Church of Alexandria. And he's going to preach to us. Get him out of here. And the crowd began to holler and shout and revile him. And there was so much commotion in the church that the saint could only say a few words, and then he went back into the altar area. And the accusations did not go away. The slandering did not go away. And even when he established a convent of nuns on the island of Egina, his enemies continued to accuse him of immorality with the nuns. There was one woman who came forward, and she claimed falsely that she was an eyewitness to improprieties going on at the convent. She even claimed, again falsely, that the offspring, if I can put it that way, of those immoral relations were put to death and thrown into a well in the back of the convent. Now, you can imagine the uproar that this caused. The police were called in, state investigators were called in, a church committee with high-ranking bishops was sent to investigate, including a young deacon by the name of Athenagoras, and we'll come back to him in a moment. Of course, while all of this was going on, while the investigation was taking place, St. Nectarios was present at the convent. And one of the nuns said to him, "How can you just stand there? Aren't you going to say anything? Listen to what they're saying about you. Listen to the accusations that they're making about you. Aren't you going to defend yourself? Aren't you at least going to tell them that it's not true?" And St. Nectarios was 70 years old at this time. Right? And he said nothing. Not long after the investigation took place, and of course they found nothing at the convent, Not long after the investigation took place, Saint Nectarios died with this cloud hanging over his head. But from the moment he died, that's when the miracles began, and they have not stopped to this day. And the deacon who was there, who was part of the committee, the investigative committee, later became the Patriarch of Constantinople, Athenagoras, and he was the one who officially canonized Saint Nectarios, a saint. So why all of this? Why all of this? For no other reason than that the life of Christ can be made manifest in our lives, and through our lives, it might be manifested in the world. That's why these things take place. Why do the saints relive the passion of the Lord? Why do they relive the passion of Christ? As I said, so that the reality of Christ, the life of Christ, can be made manifest in our world, in our own lives and in our world. So in our life, we will have difficulties. There's no avoiding that. But we have to know how to face them. We have to know how to respond to them, not to get anxious, not to become frightened, not to become angry at God, not to lose our faith, not to take out our anger or frustration on other people. None of those ways. None of those ways. But to be patient, like the palm tree when the hurricane comes and it bends under the forces. It doesn't try to fight back. It would break if it did that. It bends when the hurricane comes, and when the storm passes, it just bounces right back. So to humbly endure the trials and the tribulations that we experience with prayer and with patience and with gratitude, knowing that this is the way of Christ. Amen.